Hello, this is Jason, one of the tech-savvy teachers in residence from the Northwest Council for Computer Education, and I am evaluating Classmint, www.classmint.com. Classmint is a free, completely free, no ads, no price, note-taking system that uses a web-based interface to offer Cornell-style notes, a note-taking system. And I must admit, the reason why that I am evaluating this particular application was that I'm looking for a note-taking application to recommend to teachers that have classroom sets of Chromebooks. And so if there's an alternative available to just using Google Docs for collaborating together to take notes in any sort of format, whether it's a lecture format or in study notes using evaluating media or textbooks or other information, then I want to be able to recommend that. And that's what led me to Classmint. Classmint is being advertised in a number of prominent ed tech blogs that I've seen advertisements for, so they are certainly looking for people to evaluate the application. And the question, of course, is it a tech-savvy application that's useful in a K-12 classroom context? So let's take a look. You'll notice here that I'm using this on a Macintosh. This is the latest version of the Mac OS. On Firefox, and I'll explain why in a moment. I'm utilizing Firefox instead of my preferred browser, which is Google Chrome. And you can see it's got a pretty simplistic and clean interface. Again, notice no advertisements as part of this particular process. If I click on New Note, it takes me to a note-taking screen. It's a little sluggish, which I'm not willing to blame necessarily on the app because I am on a home internet connection, although something to certainly consider when you are in a classroom environment with a shared internet connection amongst several students. And for those of you that are aware of Cornell-style note-taking, which is a note-taking system I taught in my social studies classroom during most of my teaching career, you'll find this section or format very familiar to you. I add a topic for the notes, and so let's say it's like Monday notes. I can add a class or subject. In this case, I'm going to say it's AP European History, and I'm going to show you why I chose that in a moment. And now I'm able to take notes in these various sections. And part of this strategy, and I think you'd have to teach students how to use this appropriately in a classroom environment, is you take each kind of minor topic and put it in its own section. So you've got a pretty decent editing suite available to you to take notes. And so you could put in point 1, you could put in some sample text here, point 2, some additional sample text, point 3, and some sample text. Now, of course, I'm obviously taking fake notes here, but you can utilize this process to bring in, some fairly decent organized notes. For example, you can utilize either bullet points or numbered lists, which is very useful if you're trying to keep kind of organized sets of notes. And to give you an idea of what the bullet points look like, it's pretty easy to start a bullet points process by just simply clicking the bullet point section in the taskbar. So I found this very intuitive to use to take text notes. Something that I didn't find as intuitive, however, was the process of bringing in media content. And one of the things you would note as part of this process is if you go to the help pages, there's lots of notation about bringing in various pieces of media. And obviously an image would be most useful. And I think of this in context of a classroom environment. Taking an image from a PowerPoint presentation, taking an image from a book or some other concept. And unfortunately, there's a very limited skill set here for bringing in images. It asks you to enter an image link. And so unless you know a URL to an image, it's really not that useful to bring in an image. You couldn't, for example, snap an iPad image and bring it in on this particular application. You couldn't take something from a desktop, for example, or even utilize images given to you from an instructor that you could bring in and take notes on. It'd be impossible to do. I would say that is probably the biggest weakness of the application, is the fact that the media notes are not that particularly useful. From here, however, though, again, for those of you familiar with Cornell-style notes, you can put questions in the side, and then that becomes then fodder for asking yourself questions later when you're using these notes functionally to study. So I'm going to go ahead and save these notes. And now I have my AP European notes, the Monday notes, as part of this process. Now from here, I have quite a few options, and I think these are kind of interesting workflows that you can utilize as part of Classmate. From here, you can explain things. What it means by explain is you can then highlight and annotate these notes. So for example, I could choose point 1 and then explain point 1 by again bringing in images, although limited to images that are posted to the internet, and then also typing in clever pieces of information like so point 1, information about point 1. The reason why that's useful is because you can add a really interesting bit of annotation to these notes. So point 2, I'm going to do the same thing, explain. Now, something that I'm going to point out now, however, is that there seems to be something wrong with this particular system related to different types of browsers. And again, I mentioned earlier that this particular application seems to not work on my preferred browser, which is Google Chrome. And I tried it on Google Chrome on a MacBook, and I tried it Google Chrome on an iPad. And while the program was basically functional, I was unable to utilize some key functions using that particular set of circumstances. So for example, I'm going to show you a past set of notes. You notice I'm in the Chrome browser now. If I edit these notes, you'll notice that there's no editing bar on top. I can't change any of this, which is really unfortunate because I did spend a lot of time fairly confused when I was logged in to the system. I thought at first there was no way to add any rich text formatting to this because the bar didn't show up. Now obviously when I brought it into Firefox, the bar worked perfectly, so that wasn't ultimately an issue. More importantly, however, you'll notice that there are different options available in Chrome than there is in Firefox. I mean, the obvious answer could be it's not compatible with Chrome, except that obviously it is, because if you highlight something, you may remember that that's one of the things you can do as part of this process. I'm going to go to Save again, and I'm going to seek to annotate this, which is part of that process. Go to Explain. You'll notice that there is a little icon here for audio-based elements, and that's really interesting to me. If I click there, you'll notice now it's recording. At least it tells me it's recording. Test, 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 test. However, if I go to Save, I was not able to get that to work as consistently as possible. So you can see here that it tells me that speech failed. So the option's not available on Firefox. It is available on Chrome. Rich formatting is not available on Chrome. And when I try to utilize the multimedia component, it ultimately failed. So obviously this is somewhat still in beta and does require some additional work to make this fully functional. That would also mean that it's not a great option for Chromebooks, which is why I wanted to approach this application in the first place. Going back to the editing screen for my original set of notes, the key piece here is publishing, which I can then do so. Publishing takes my note, and from what I'm able to tell, it makes it publicly available on the Classmate site. And to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of that it seems like there should be a way to more privately share your notes, maybe within a class group, without having to make those things particularly public. Although once you do share, you have the option of sending that link to Twitter or Facebook or Google+. That's all great. But if I wanted to be part of a public sharing, I think I should get more choice in that and more elements of privacy if I seek to do so. There is a share privately feature, which is useful, except it's not really clear how I make my note not private first and then share it privately. So that workflow doesn't work very well for me. If you look at public notes available inside the system, there are tons and tons and tons of examples for you to look at. Many of these notes seem like they are at least interesting way to use the platform. There is a great kind of organized element to these notes, and again, those of you that are Cornell Note fans will find this to be familiar. Two other features I want to point out that are important as part of this process. To study notes, whether they're your notes or other public notes, you have two options. For Cornell-style users, you'll notice that you can actually mimic what happens on paper by clicking the Fold button, and that folds away the content information and leaves just the left-hand column for you, so you could essentially quiz yourself. And that's a really great feature for those of you that utilize Cornell Notes. Additionally, if you click on flashcards, it will give you a sense of kind of a flashcard style system for the interesting pieces of the notations. So you can utilize this, and the reason why I paused is because it's reading this out loud to me, which is, I don't find it to be particularly useful. But there is some artificial language and artificial text creation, speech creation that's part of this process. And then last, I also want to point out that you can take these notes and organize them by class. So you'll notice here that I've taken a series of AP European History notes. If I click here, it's going to show you everything that I've marked in the upper right-hand corner as AP European History. One last thing I want to point out is that I've been experimenting with this with a couple of different accounts. It does allow you to log in with a Google account, which I think is a great feature if you're using it inside of the kind of Google Apps suite. But I did notice that the more I played with the note, the more it tended to create some junk text. And what I mean by junk text is that you notice here that I created a causes of the French Revolution, results of the French Revolution, and some sample notes. For some reason, that text was repeated over and over and over again as I played with a sample note inside the system. Again, the system seems a little buggy, so I'm not sure if it's necessarily ready for prime time to use with students, especially in kind of a class environment. So what are the pros and cons? Well, first, pros to this, Cornell Notes are a great note-taking system, and the website is not afraid to share with you that there's quite a bit of research that supports the Cornell Note system, and I would agree with that both from the research observation and my own observation inside my own social studies classroom. If you can get students to use Cornell Notes, they're a very effective strategy. Second, it works on mobile devices, and I was particularly successful of getting this to work on both an iPad and a 7-inch Android tablet. Unfortunately, however, because you're taking notes like this and because there's no pen input, I felt that it was very clunky without a hardware keyboard. I do have an iPad 3 with a Logitech keyboard. That made it less clunky, but it wasn't a smooth experience unless I had the hardware keyboard. Next, the editing tools just don't seem to work in Chrome, and that's really unfortunate because I think this software has a really good shot of being a power app inside the Chromebook universe, but I couldn't get it to work with Chrome. That was Chrome on my MacBook and Chrome also on my iPad, which is, I think, a big weakness of this system. There are some good organization tools, and there's a Google login. So the cons, the first one, and I have to mention this, they do advertise it on the main website as free with no ads, but that of course can be problematic if you are attempting to use it with a class. I don't know what their business model is, and I think that's a real challenge for those of you that want to use this as a permanent platform inside your classroom. It'd be really unfortunate if this ultimately had advertisements on it. It'd also be unfortunate if their business model eventually pulled the access to this to the platform in general. If it suddenly shut down, like many Web 2.0 tools tend to do, that leaves your students and you in a lurch. And I didn't find any easy way to export that to a format that would be familiar to other systems. The image import is extremely clunky and requires that you have an image posted to a accessible web address that's unacceptable in most environments. Next, the default is a public share, which I think is something that is not desirable in a classroom environment. The interface isn't as natural as I hoped it would be. It did take me a while as someone with a lot of experience in both note-taking apps and with Cornell apps to kind of get used to the process. And last and certainly not least, there's no real means to collaborate with other users. You can share publicly your notes, but you can't directly collaborate with another group of students, which makes it inferior to other available products. So that's Classmint.com, the Cornell-style note-taking system. I'll admit that I'm pretty leery about the tool. It felt like the interface had some elements to go. It was obviously somewhat broken on the most common browsers, and the scenario that I was most looking forward to, which was using it in a Chrome environment, like a Chromebook environment, I was not able to get it to work. And so I think there are probably other solutions, maybe the best one, of course, being a Google Docs system or Google Drive system inside of Google Apps for Education. It's probably better. So thanks for watching. This is Jason, the tech-savvy teacher in residence for the Northwest Council for Computer Education, and you've seen Classmint today at www.classmint.com. Thanks for watching.